In medieval times, paper was so scarce and valuable that it was often considered worth its weight in gold, light gold. Historians remind us that people were careful with every single sheet, scribbling on both sides and reusing scraps to avoid waste. Yet, in our modern world, we seem to go through paper as if it were inexhaustible. Perhaps this ease and abundance have led to complacency in more aspects of life than we realize, including the way we view our global landscape. A sailor once joked, "I want tobacco sugar," though he wasn't really sure what that meant. It could have been an odd code phrase for a supply request or simply a silly throwaway line. But in an environment as isolated and charged as a naval ship at sea, even mundane remarks can take on an air of profound significance. You see, at sea, every detail matters. In the grand scheme, everything we thought we knew about the world might someday turn out to be completely wrong. Our assumptions are always at risk of being upended by new discoveries, unexpected challenges, or shifting global tensions. This is particularly true for those who serve on the front lines of national defense. Day in and day out, they encounter scenarios that remind them how quickly the status quo can change. "Hands to action stations, hands to action stations." The loudspeaker will sometimes blare, sending a jolt of adrenaline across the decks. It's a call that transforms the daily hum of life aboard into a focused readiness for confrontation or crisis. In these moments, the entire ship moves as one, each person stepping into a carefully orchestrated dance of preparedness. In the midst of this, a new chapter of naval history unfolds. A strike package is now underway, but it's not just missiles and fighter jets that define this mission. It's also the camaraderie, courage, and, at times, the humor of the 280 souls aboard HMS Duncan. This Type 45 Royal Navy destroyer, worth over $1 billion, wrestles with cutting-edge technology that few can fully comprehend. It can track a target the size of a cricket ball hurtling through the air at 3 times the speed of sound from roughly 150 miles away. Its missile system, widely touted as one of the best air defense capabilities in the world, stands by, ready to respond to evolving threats. Yet even the most advanced warship relies on its human element. This ship is also home to 280 men and women, the official brochure reads. It might be a steel fortress on the outside, but inside, birthdays are celebrated, mundane paperwork gets filed, and new friendships form. Every day, small personal dramas unfold, from the mess decks to the top of the bridge, as the crew navigates both the sea and their own lives. Our cameras, and by extension our narrative, have been granted unprecedented access to observe the drama of HMS Duncan's 7-month mission. This mission will bring her and her crew face to face with Russian forces. There is tension in the air because, at the moment, Russia's influence is expanding, and many perceive that as a challenge. The men and women aboard Duncan find themselves at the center of a geopolitical tug-of-war, especially when missiles begin raining down in Syria. It's a sobering reality to realize they are literally in the thick of everything that's happening. "We're just waiting now to see what happens and see if anybody bites at us," one sailor remarks. That wait can be the hardest part, knowing that something could go wrong at any moment, yet not knowing exactly when or how. This is the story of HMS Duncan, of its people, and of its critical journey through troubled waters. It's 8 o'clock in the morning. The Royal Navy's HMS Duncan is preparing to set sail from Portsmouth. A row of heads peeks over the rails, scanning the dock for last-minute arrivals and cargo. One by one, crates of supplies move from the quay onto the lower decks. "Morning, Royal," calls out a watchful sailor, nodding to a marine standing by with a clipboard. But the hustle and bustle is unrelenting. With only a few hours left until departure, Captain Eleanor Stack, a slender woman of unflappable composure, has barely a moment to breathe. "It feels particularly frenetic at the moment," Captain Stack confesses. "It's that final last-minute rush before deployment. We're loading stores, integrating new personnel, and finishing up all the little bits of material prep that need to be done. As you can see, it's a busy old ship at the moment." That might be putting it mildly. 6 tons of potatoes, 4,000 frozen chickens, and a staggering 45,000 toilet rolls are being crammed into Duncan's storage areas. At the same time, new crew members lug their duffel bags up cramped gangways, searching for their bunk assignments. Up on the bridge, the meteorologist gives the morning weather brief, reporting easterly winds at 20 knots, some low cloud banks, and a chance of drizzle. None of it will slow the Duncan's mission, though. Flying overhead, a signal flag flutters. The destroyer's effectiveness pennant. According to tradition, it's raised to celebrate the culmination of months of rigorous training, symbolizing that the entire Duncan company is fully prepared for the tasks ahead. Captain Stack herself is something of an anomaly. Born and raised in Glasgow with no family background in the Navy, she once visited HMS Argyll during a school trip and was instantly intrigued. "I think my parents assumed I was going through a phase," she muses. "Maybe they still do, but here I am." Now, in command of one of the most technologically advanced warships in the world, Stack shoulders immense responsibility. Despite that, she jokes good-naturedly with her team, ensuring they feel both supported and confident. 26-year-old Liam Fletcher, one of the ship's chefs, is among the last to arrive. This will be his 5th tour at sea, and the longest yet, nearly 7 months. He greets a friend with an energetic knock-knock as he hefts a duffel bag stuffed with clothes, books, and a trusty laptop. "For me, deploying for a number of months is exciting," he admits. "You never know in today's world what's around the corner." He barely has time to stow his gear in the tight quarters he'll be sharing before the call comes over the loudspeaker. "Ready on the bridge. Make preparations to depart." Everyone scrambles to their stations. After months of planning and training, the moment has arrived. Lines are cast off, and HMS Duncan edges away from the dock. A small crowd on shore offers waves and cheers, family, friends, and curious onlookers. "Right, let's get going," Captain Stack says with calm determination. "We've got a job to do." Their destination, the Mediterranean, where the Duncan will rendezvous with several NATO warships. From there, they'll head into the Black Sea. This region, which borders Russia and Crimea, is a flashpoint in global affairs, making the next few weeks anything but routine. "You never quite know how certain nations will react to our presence," the captain remarks, "but we have to be ready for anything." The first few days at sea are always a whirlwind. Crew members settle into a routine of watches, drills, and ship maintenance. HMS Duncan is a bustling community, nearly 280 men and women from all backgrounds, engineers, chefs, weapon specialists, medics, navigators, each with a distinct role. They live in close quarters, and every inch of space is precious. Martin Watson, the Executive Warrant Officer, EWO, is responsible for overseeing crew welfare and morale. He strides through the ship's narrow passageways, politely but firmly addressing any issues he sees. "I am the eyes and ears on the ground," Watson says. "It's up to me to spot problems and feed them back to the captain." A typical day in Watson's schedule includes everything from ensuring the heads, naval jargon for restrooms, are clean to organizing uniform inspections and encouraging camaraderie. One moment, he might be checking that a corridor is clear of clutter. The next, he's talking to a young sailor about homesickness. Overcrowding is a real concern. Despite the ship's considerable size, 280 people is a tight fit. Even the officers' quarters are small, and junior sailors often find themselves sleeping in converted storage spaces. The brand-new recruits, affectionately called sprogs, tend to get the worst spots. "We're absolutely maxed out," Watson explains. "This is the best we can do right now, so we all have to make it work." 18-year-old Owen Clements, the youngest on board, has just completed his training. For him, this deployment is his first time away from home, and it's daunting. "At night, when it's time to sleep, I think of my mum and dad," he admits. "It's really easy to feel lonely, but then I remind myself this is what I joined up for." Barely a week at sea, an urgent call crackles through the ship's broadcast system. "A crew member has collapsed." Within seconds, the medical team and first aid volunteers rushed to the location. The casualty, a 36-year-old helicopter engineer, shows signs of a potential heart attack. The flight deck crew scrambles to prepare Duncan's onboard helicopter for a CASEVAC, a casualty evacuation. Martin Watson coordinates from the ship's central point of communication. The captain orders full speed toward the nearest hospital facility on the mainland. 2 medics, including 28-year-old Ryan Dillmore, accompany the casualty on the helicopter ride. Their job is to keep him stable and ensure he gets immediate care upon landing. Nervous tension hangs over the deck as the helicopter takes off. For those who remain on board, there's little to do but wait. Fortunately, word soon arrives that he's being treated and is in good spirits, though in pain. "Never a dull day on Duncan," Ryan jokes when she returns. "He's in good hands now." Such emergencies remind everyone just how vulnerable life can be at sea. Despite all the high-tech defenses and weaponry, the ship is still populated by human beings, fragile, precious, and prone to medical crises like anyone else. Time is short. The ship can't afford to lose momentum by returning to port for routine fueling, so it conducts a replenishment at sea, RAS. HMS Duncan carefully maneuvers alongside a large tanker that acts as a mobile gas station on the open water. "This is one of the most challenging aspects of naval operations," Captain Stack notes. "We have to maintain a distance of about 30-40 meters, matching speed and position perfectly to connect fuel lines. One wrong move, and there's a real risk of collision." For 18-year-old Owen, a newly minted sailor, it's an eye-opening experience. He's part of the team that manages the deck machinery, handling hoses and lines. Once the refueling is complete, pumping roughly 500,000 liters of fuel, there's still a time-honored tradition to uphold, exchanging gifts with the tanker crew. Duncan's officers hand over a commemorative plaque and a tie adorned with the ship's own tartan. Next arrives another highlight: the mail. The tanker often delivers letters and small parcels from home. Owen receives several envelopes, one from his grandfather, one from his mom, and a surprise from an uncle. For a moment, the stress of the job melts away as he reads over well-wishes and bits of family gossip. Back on board, a wave of laughter echoes through the passageways when Ryan Dillmore makes her rounds distributing condoms. "No glove, no love," she says cheerfully. "Condom fairy coming through. Everyone stay safe." The Royal Navy enforces a strict no-touching policy at sea, but once a ship hits port, there's liberty time. Preventing outbreaks of sexually transmitted infections is essential to maintaining operational readiness. It might seem like a trivial chore, but Ryan's job is crucial. One contagious sailor could sideline an entire department if not handled properly. Between serious medical duties, distributing prophylactics is a light-hearted break. Still, it reminds everyone that each person's health is the ship's health. Soon, HMS Duncan is no longer alone in the vast Mediterranean. Several Allied warships converge, forming a NATO fleet. Duncan has been designated the flagship, placing her at the center of a multi-nation task group. "It's a very big deal for us," Captain Stack acknowledges. "To have a Type 45 as flagship is a first. We're proud to lead." Yet this also means welcoming a new leader on board, NATO Commodore Mike Hutley. His arrival shifts the chain of command, effectively placing Captain Stack under his authority. He's responsible for coordinating not just Duncan, but multiple Allied ships patrolling one of the world's most politically sensitive regions. In a formal address to the crew, Commodore Hutley explains that they'll soon transit the Bosphorus Strait into the Black Sea, a zone where tensions run high due to Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014. "We do not have normal relations with Russia," the Commodore warns. "Every nation has a right to exercise freely in international waters. But the moment we enter the Black Sea, Russia's interest in us will be immediate and intense." For many aboard Duncan, this will be their first brush with a potential hostile environment. They listen raptly, bracing themselves for the challenges to come. Istanbul is a city straddling 2 continents, divided by the narrow Bosphorus Strait. Cruising through these waters always poses risks. The channel is tight, commercial traffic is heavy, and the threat of terrorism cannot be dismissed. A Turkish pilot boards Duncan to provide local expertise, but unlike a commercial vessel, the pilot does not take the helm. Instead, he advises the crew on safe navigation. Captain Stack and her team remain in control, carefully weaving the 8,000-ton destroyer between bustling ferries and cargo ships. Midway through the transit, one of Duncan's 2 propellers unexpectedly stops. Steering a warship on a single prop is complex. The helmsman must compensate by adjusting the rudder angle and power settings more frequently. Meanwhile, the Turkish pilot becomes anxious, pressing for a slightly different course than the ship's navigator. "This is my ship," the navigator respectfully reminds the pilot. "We've done this before. We will manage with 1 prop." A tense standoff is resolved when they finally clear the last bridge and enter the Black Sea. It's a relief, but an ominous one. Duncan is now in waters closely watched by Russian patrols. Shortly after entering the Black Sea, a lookout spots a suspicious silhouette on the horizon. In the ship's operations room, a flurry of activity ensues. Data streams onto digital screens, bearings, distances, possible threats. "Hands to action stations, hands to action stations," the announcement calls, summoning the entire ship to its highest alert level. Petty officers check weapons, radars pivot, and the commanding officer demands real-time updates. "It appears to be a Privac-class Russian warship," an operator reports. "It's armed, so we can't let our guard down." As if on cue, the Russian ship adjusts course, tailing Duncan and broadcasting a clear message. "We see you. They're watching us closely," Lieutenant James Smith explains. "They'll want to learn how we operate, observe our tactics, and gather intelligence." While the tension is palpable, there's no immediate threat. The crew is instructed to remain polite and professional over radio transmissions. No sudden moves, no provocative chatter. Still, minds race with possibilities. Will the Russians try to intimidate us? Will they attempt close passes? Suddenly, another alarm rings out. "Man overboard! Man overboard! Port side!" Everyone scrambles once again, scanning for a figure in the waves. Captain Stack halts the Russian analysis and instructs them to begin a SAR, search and rescue maneuver. The ship loops around the area, looking for a struggling swimmer. Martin Watson organizes a head count. Mercifully, within minutes, they confirm that all crew members are accounted for. As the search party approaches the mystery object, they realize it's just a floating log. "We passed a tree trunk about 5 meters away," a rescue swimmer says. "At first it looked like a man waving for help. Turns out it was just driftwood." Relieved, the crew laughs nervously. Throughout the entire incident, the Russian warship hovers in the distance, undoubtedly recording every maneuver. The message is clear. In the Black Sea, HMS Duncan will receive no privacy. After several days under the watchful eye of the Russian Navy, Duncan and the NATO fleet pull into a friendly port for resupply and diplomacy. Chef Fletcher and his galley team are tasked with preparing an elaborate cocktail party for nearly 200 guests. Dignitaries, NATO officers, local officials, and allied naval commanders. Official hospitality is something the Royal Navy does best, Martin Watson tells the team. It's a chance to build relationships. The chefs prepare canapés, pastries, and fine British delicacies, scones with clotted cream, tiny sausage rolls, and a hearty selection of cheeses. Meanwhile, the stewards, some still mastering English, practice polite small talk. "I'm basically in charge of getting everyone adequately inebriated," jokes a young steward, "but in a sensible way, just enough to make them friendly, not enough to cause an incident." As dignitaries arrive, they swap pleasantries and business cards. The conversation inevitably turns to the region's mounting tensions. "The Russians consider the Black Sea their personal lake," one visiting commander comments, "and they don't like to see us here." "It's very serious," agrees another. "We must tread carefully, but remain firm. We have our rights under international law." The next morning, the lively atmosphere dissipates as soon as they weigh anchor. The Russian shadow is back, right on time, tracking Duncan's every move. Not long after departing port, the operations room picks up an incoming contact on radar, an aircraft of unknown affiliation moving at high speed. Within moments, intelligence confirms suspected Russian Federation Su-24 Fencer inbound bearing 090. Hands to action stations, hands to action stations, the call blares yet again. People spring into action. Weapons officers tune the missile defense systems. The flight deck braces for possible scramble. The entire ship pulses with adrenaline. This is the first time we've seen a Russian aircraft this close, Lieutenant Smith notes. Their capability is formidable. Their intent is always the big question. The Fencer roars by, crossing just outside what the Royal Navy considers a safe distance. Then it circles back, as though to demonstrate maneuverability. Nervous glances abound, but the crew remains focused. They track its path meticulously, ready to respond if the plane becomes hostile. After a few passes, the aircraft disappears toward the horizon. A relieved hush settles in the operations center. "They're testing us," the Commodore concludes, "and we must be ready for them to come back." Meanwhile, life in the galley goes on. Chef Fletcher and his team must feed hundreds of sailors 3 times a day, nearly 900 meals. With every action station alarm, the ship's operational pace quickens, and many crew members grab meals on the go. "We need to feed everyone as fast as possible," Fletcher explains. No time for chit-chat when the tension ramps up. From American pancakes at breakfast to fish and chips Friday, the galley tries to maintain morale through good food. Fletcher has honed the ability to crack 2 eggs at once, flip an omelette in seconds, and produce massive trays of brownies, all while the warship rocks in rough seas. "I joined the Navy to see the world," he confesses during a short break, "and to cook in interesting places, but I never imagined I'd be in such a tense environment." For many on board, especially the younger sailors, the emotional toll of separation from loved ones grows more intense with each passing day. Owen Clements still tucks photos of his mom, dad, and girlfriend inside his bunk. Sometimes he'll read their letters under a dim reading lamp, trying not to wake his bunkmates. "My dad and I used to fish together," Owen recalls. "I miss that most, but I know they're proud of me." Chef Fletcher, too, carries personal memories that shape his outlook. He lost his father in 2009, and the absence is especially noticeable during major milestones, like his passing out ceremony, where recruits formally join the Royal Navy. "I just wish my dad could have seen me standing there," he says quietly. Over the next few days, Duncan leads the NATO fleet through a series of training exercises with Allied navies. Radar drills, gunnery practice, and submarine hunting simulations fill the schedule. The Russians watch intently, sometimes sending their jets overhead or positioning warships near enough to observe the maneuvers. "Information is everything," Commodore Hutley explains to a group of officers, "and the Russians know that as well as we do. They'll gather every scrap of data they can." In the operations room, rotating shifts of sailors spend hours scrutinizing radar signals. When a new contact appears on screen, the tension spikes. Even a commercial airliner crossing overhead is momentarily treated with suspicion until properly identified. One grey morning, an announcement crackles across the intercom. "Attention all hands, a random drug test will be conducted immediately. All personnel selected by the testing team must report to the flight deck." For many, it's an unwelcome surprise. But in the Royal Navy, random drug testing is standard procedure, ensuring the entire crew remains fit for duty. Chef Fletcher nearly drops a tray of eggs when he hears his name. Sighing, he delegates flipping omelettes to another chef and hurries topside. Some sailors exchange nervous jokes. "It's not like we have opportunities to do anything out here," one laughs, "but I guess you never know." The captain and commodore do not escape the test either. Everyone on board is subject to the same rules. It's part of the discipline that holds the Royal Navy together. As the days go by, the Russians grow bolder. One morning, a swarm of jets appears on the radar, 16 or 17 aircraft coming from multiple directions. The operations room hums with urgency. HMS Duncan and her NATO allies track each plane closely, calculating potential threat levels. The closest approach was only 200 yards off our beam, an officer recounts. That's basically right next door. Every nerve is on edge. This time, the jets are not just passing by, they're making a statement. The deck crews stand by to launch helicopters if needed, while the combat systems officers prepare for the worst. Captain Stack, outwardly calm, grips the arm of her chair just a little tighter. "Be ready for them to come back," she instructs the watch leaders. "We'll not be caught off guard." As HMS Duncan's deployment continues, the tension with Russia shows no signs of diminishing. In just a few short weeks, the crew has witnessed how everything we thought we knew about the world might turn out to be completely wrong. The daily routine is overshadowed by the ever-present possibility of conflict, a stark reminder of the fragile state of global peace,